In Buddhism, renunciation does not simply mean abandoning the material world or living as a monk in a monastery. Renunciation is, in fact, the detachment from desires and attachments that generate suffering. The Buddha taught that, to achieve liberation from suffering, it is necessary to let go of attachments to what is impermanent and unsatisfactory, such as material objects, sensory desires, and even the idea of a fixed self. Renunciation is not a rejection of the world or things, but a release from the need to possess or control everything. It is a practice that allows us to live more freely because we free ourselves from the constant pursuit of more and become capable of appreciating what we have in the present moment, without the need for more possessions or external validation. Renunciation is essentially a process of mental transformation. When we let go of attachment, we stop seeing things as sources of permanent happiness. We realize that true peace does not come from accumulating, but from letting go. This shift in perspective is key to finding lasting peace, as we free ourselves from the illusions and expectations that trap us in suffering. Attachment is the root of suffering, and the reason why so many people feel dissatisfied and discontented even when they have what they want. In Buddhism, dukkha, suffering, is understood as a direct consequence of attachment to worldly things. Attachment makes us believe that external things have the power to bring us lasting happiness. However, since everything in the world is impermanent, these things inevitably leave us, creating frustration and suffering. For example, attachment to money or material possessions can lead to a constant sense of insecurity. Even if you have what you desire, there is always the fear of losing everything, and the need for more never goes away. This creates a cycle of dissatisfaction fueled by endless desires. The same happens with relationships. When the mind clings to the idea that our happiness depends on other people, we create expectations that are often unmet. When these expectations are not fulfilled, pain and frustration arise. However, when we learn to let go, we are not tied to outcomes or what others may or may not do for us. Instead, we focus on cultivating our inner peace, which does not depend on external factors. Attachment to the self also generates suffering. When we identify with a fixed image of ourselves, we become trapped by our own limitations and fears. Learning to free ourselves from attachment to the self is one of the greatest steps on the path of renunciation, as it allows us to let go of concerns about self-image and expectations for the future. Practicing renunciation does not require becoming a monk or living in constant retreat. Practical renunciation can be applied in every moment of daily life. It means giving up the need to control circumstances and beginning to live in a simpler, more detached way. One way to practice renunciation in daily life is through mindfulness. By practicing mindfulness, we can become more aware of our desires and attachments as they arise. When the mind begins to crave something, we can pause and observe that desire without reacting to it. Instead of immediately giving in, we simply observe its presence and recognize its impermanence. This allows us to choose not to identify with the desire. Renunciation also involves simplicity. This can manifest in letting go of material possessions or choosing to live in a simpler way. By reducing the number of things we own, we diminish our attachment to them. This does not mean living in poverty or giving up what is necessary, but learning to value what we have without the need for more. Another way to practice renunciation is through emotional detachment. This means not identifying with the highs and lows of emotions or clinging to fixed ideas about how things should be. By practicing equanimity, we learn to accept both pleasure and pain without attaching to either. The path of renunciation leads us to a life of inner peace. By letting go of attachment, we begin to experience a deep sense of freedom and tranquility, as we no longer depend on external factors for our happiness. Liberation from suffering arises from detachment, acceptance of impermanence, and understanding that true well-being lies within us, not in external things or circumstances. The Buddha taught that by renouncing attachment, we free ourselves from the prison of desires and suffering. True inner peace is not something we can obtain through possessions or achievements, but something that arises from letting go and accepting what is. When we practice renunciation sincerely, we begin to see that there is nothing to lose, as everything is impermanent. By following the path of renunciation, we cultivate a lighter, more open, and more compassionate mind. We do not cling to what we own, to the people we love, or to the ideas we have about ourselves. Instead, we free ourselves to live in the present moment with full acceptance and gratitude. This practice allows us to live more fully without the chains of attachment. True liberation from suffering comes when we understand that, by letting go of attachment, we create space for true peace. By detaching, we connect with reality as it is, impermanent, selfless, and unsatisfactory, and paradoxically find true happiness in the freedom of having nothing. Renunciation is, therefore, the path to inner peace and true liberation. The path of renunciation is not about denying life or its pleasures, but about freeing oneself from attachment to external things that cause suffering. By practicing detachment, we abandon the illusions of lasting happiness in possessions, desires, and identities, and begin to experience deep and enduring peace within ourselves. To renounce is, in essence, to free oneself from suffering and make room for a life of equanimity, wisdom, and deep understanding. By following this path, we can achieve inner peace, freedom from attachment, and ultimately, liberation from suffering. Renunciation is the path that leads us to a simpler, more conscious, and more authentic life, where true happiness does not depend on having more, but on being more.